They knelt in front of him, 200 warriors bowing to a 9-year-old while painted for war, a boy who wore just rags for clothing. The youngster was motionless, with dirt still beneath his fingernails while gazing at faceless figures who should have resulted in his demise. However, instead of scalping implements, they provided feathers rather than screams of battle. Honorable remarks in a whisper. The young man who all of the settlers had kicked in the now territory was being handled as principally by their sworn adversaries. How had disposable orphans become the most respected individual in an antagonistic camp overnight? The same boy 3 days prior had been clearing trash behind the general shop, Miller's, looking for scraps he wouldn't get sick from. Ezekiel Marsh had mastered the art of shadow throughout the community, staying away from the obscenities and boots that trailed after him all over, 9 years old and already invisible to all the important people. He was viewed by the settler as a bother, a reminder of the outbreak of cholera that had left him with his parents after taking them away, just a name engraved on a wooden cross. His tummy ached as he discovered an apple, half moldy. Dismissing the worst portions before carefully biting into it, although the flavor was unpleasant, hunger made it something that could be eaten. Using the store's window, he observed families purchasing from the back window, kids holding on to their mothers' skirts as fathers talked weather and crops, normal, secure items that are owned by individuals who possessed sleeping quarters at night. "Leave, you tiny rat, go from there," the voice broke from the entrance. The shopkeeper had a crimson face, disgustingly, as though Ezekiel's presence could contaminate his goods. "I'll have you if I catch you stealing again." In the town plaza, they were whipped. Ezekiel scurried back while holding the apple, center. Although he hadn't taken anything, justifications were never important. The truth was a luxury for those with a companion to have faith in them. He hid behind a pile of vacant barrels, anticipating Miller's focus to stray elsewhere. This was endurance, forbearance, quiet, and remaining invisible, so small that most people forgot you existed. The edge of the jungle beckoned to him, ensuring the kind of tranquility that only came with being alone. Ezekiel's favorite was the woods. Nevertheless, trees did not pass judgment. No animals kicked. Additionally, occasionally, if being cautious and silent, he was able to act as though he were an adventurer rather than an orphan, charting areas. Rather than searching for leftovers, he moved in between, pursuing a game path through the forests that twisted farther into the woods. Behind him, the sounds of settlement diminished, replaced by rustling and bird-singing leaves. He could breathe here without keeping an eye on him. In this place, he could picture his parents waiting for him in the future, prepared to wrap him in arms that recalled the meaning of love felt. But there were secrets in the woods, more sinister than his solitude. Additionally, today one of those secrets would be altered. Everything he believed to be true about allies and foes. A moan came from in the distance, low and hurt, unquestionably human. Every time Ezekiel froze, his survival instinct was urging him to run. This time, the sound was weaker, similar to air seeping out of a hole in the lung. Every logical idea expressed Ezekiel should spin around and act as though he had not heard anything. Astute orphans survived longer by keeping to themselves. However, his interest had always been vulnerability, the same quality that had gained him thrashings more than he could keep track of. He moved slowly forward, putting each foot in cautiously to prevent breaking twigs. He saw through a hole in the foliage, something that chilled his blood. A man was lying hunched over a fallen log. His black skin was streaked with black and red that suggested conflict markings. However, the blood was what held Ezekiel's attention. Actual blood, not paint, dripping from a large cut in the one over the man's shoulder and another in his ribs. Here, a local warrior by himself and passing away, all of Ezekiel's stories learned that the tribes flooded back, barbaric murderers who chopped off kids, ruthless raiders who set fire to villages and captured people. The explanation for why. Settlers never went it alone. They maintained their firearms loaded at all times. The monster ought to have been this man. From those bad dreams, however, lying there broken and unconscious. He simply stared like someone in need of assistance. The chest of the warrior rose and fell in shallow breaths that were strained. His face was shown with discomfort even when, unconscious, additionally, his gray flow of flesh belonged to someone who had lost too much blood. Without therapy, he would have passed away before sunset. Ezekiel had witnessed enough fatalities to realize its coming. He ought to flee. Must hurry back to town and inform Sheriff Hawkins or Miller that there was a wounded Aboriginal person in the forest. They would most likely pay him some cash for the details, perhaps even give him a call. For once, it was helpful. The residents of the town would assemble a hunting team, complete what another person had begun, and Ezekiel would ultimately be the helpful hero, maintaining the safety of the settlement. However, the warrior shifted a little, letting out a low sigh slipping out of his mouth. Ezekiel also noticed something that made him halt. A tiny leather bag dangled from the man's neck, and hanging from it was a carved wooden horse. Uncomplicated, innocent, the type of gadget Dad could create for his son, the sort of present that mentioned not barbarism, but love. The horse that was carved swayed softly with every breath of effort, and all of a sudden, the monster from the stories was reduced to a man who maybe would become a parent himself, a male who would someone miss if he didn't return home. Ezekiel's hands shook when he became aware of what he was going to do. Every instinct for survival spoke out against it. Each lesson he had acquired regarding remaining secure and undetectable protested. They roared, however, for the first time. In his brief, cruel life, something more powerful than dread was in charge, his choices. There was something that felt eerily similar to kindness. The warrior required refuge, bandages, and water. He required someone to be concerned about whether he survived or perished. Additionally, standing there in the growing darkness, Ezekiel made a decision. It would reverberate throughout their lives. Forever. First, water. The brook flowed 50 yards north, it's clear. And Ezekiel had nothing but his hands to carry it in. He traveled 4 times, dripping valuable drips in. Between the warrior's pursed mouth, observing the man's throat automatically move to swallow. Every trip seemed like a stroll through flames, being aware that finding implied definite doom. The eyes of the soldiers flitted open on the 4th journey, gloomy and distracted, with fever and ache. They gazed for a horrifying minute at each other over a divide of animosity that had been sculpted by several generations of violence, in order to wait for the man to cry out, to request assistance, to disclose his presence to any additional combatants maybe looking in the area. Rather, the man spoke in his native tongue. Delicate, inquisitive words. He stared at Ezekiel's face, appearing to list every aspect of the unclean, pale boy who ought to have been his enemy. Then his eyes shut once more, and his respiration became a little deeper. Although dead, only sleeping, and unimaginably trusting that the youngster kneeling next to him signified no damage, Ezekiel ripped garments off his only shirt with flimsy patched fabric, but sufficiently sanitized to be used as bandages. The serious wound on the shoulder was caused by a rifle ball that had been found to be clean through. The wound on the chest was shallower but longer, likely from a blade. Someone had made a concerted effort to kill this man, and they had come quite close, using instinct and touch. Ezekiel pressed the fabric up against the worst of the bleed. The fighter stiffened, but didn't scream. His jaw tightened in an effort to combat the anguish. His hand moved a little, fingers grazing the boy. Ezekiel saw it. It wasn't a coincidence. It was recognition. A warrior's method of expressing gratitude to someone who ought to have been the one who carried out his execution as the sun started to set, depicting the woodland in gold and amber hues. Ezekiel's face was a fresh issue. The fighter was unable to relocate, but he was unable to remain here either. The brook was situated too near the hunters who used this region and the main trail frequently. In the morning, someone would locate both of them. A cave was located around a quarter of a mile farther into the forest, small, not only a hollow in the rocks, but sufficient to offer housing and hiding. Transporting the warrior there would entail sustaining the majority of his weight, a seemingly insurmountable task considering Ezekiel's diminutive stature. But he had never been deterred by impossible. Impossible simply referred to the life he'd been given at birth. He successfully raised the warrior to his feet, leaning hard on the larger man up against his shoulder. Every action was pain. They were both breathing heavily. The grizzled face of a warrior who had worked hard and suffered, blood soaked through the temporary coverings, creating a subtle trace that later Ezekiel would have to cover. They passed through the crowd like shadows in the gloom. Two misfits. Assisting one another, others lived to see another day. The cavern smelled like animal scents and ancient leaves. However, everything was dry and concealed from casual.